Phil Andrews, I say this as the ultimate compliment. You're kind of a British Ted Lasso. Because, first of all, you're a nice guy with a good attitude about life.
Very kind.
And second, you came from another country to turn around something I bet you didn't really know about personally. Maybe you did, weightlifting. And now you're sort of in the sequel because now you're the CEO of USA Fencing, and you were just named one of the 40 under 40 top CEOs of sports NGBs, and now you're going to Paris and the Olympics. Holy moly, Phil.
It's been a journey. It's been a journey, but thank you so much, Evie. And yeah, I guess there are some similarities to Ted Lasso in the opposite direction.
In the opposite direction, yeah.
We believe. I guess that would be the right thing to say right now.
Yes, exactly. Hey, it's E.B. Moss, and this is episode 23 of season 2 of Insider Interviews, where you get the insider scoop on the business of media, marketing, and advertising. And in this episode, we're going to learn about marketing stabbing and parrying from USA Fencing CEO Phil Andrews. Phil has a long history of turning around niche sports and growing awareness, revenue, and membership using innovative and creative marketing and fundraising ideas. He did it first with USA weightlifting, and now he's doing it again with the Olympics and Paralympics bound team. Here's Phil. Phil Andrews, please fill in some blanks. How the heck did you get here?
So I'm basically a souvenir. Most people go to London, they buy those like small little brass Big Bens. The United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee oversees Olympic sport in this country, Paralympic sport. And I worked on the London side, so I hosted what's called the High Performance Training Center. So the United States, along with a number of other major countries, will set up their own training center in an Olympic city. And I ran that, along with a media center, the donor relations center, and about 33 other interesting and less interesting things for the Olympic Games. So we housed all the bus drivers for the Olympic Games, but the least interesting thing we did, although the most profitable. So apparently I did a relatively good job, because instead of bringing home a small Big Ben from the games, the Team USA decided they wanted to bring home this guy from the games.
That's great. Actually, You know what I want to start with is you manage an NGB. So in my language, that's sort of like a league, like the NFL. So, but for lay people, it stands for National Governing Body. Is that correct?
Correct. So most people think the Olympics is one organization. It's actually one per sport. So as we're talking around the Olympic Games, people have probably seen things like a USA Gymnastics and the USA Track and Field and the USA Swimming, especially with their major televised trials events. Then there's the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. That's sort of the overarching organization. Their job is to send the team to the games. Okay. That's really what they do. The logistics of that. So I'm boiling this down a lot. Each sport is run by its own company, its own corporation. So USA Fencing runs the whole of fencing in the US. USA Gymnastics runs the whole of gymnastics in the US. USA Weightlifting, and so on. So NGB is national governing body. In other areas of the world, they're called national federations. But the idea is we are the sort of authority on the sport across the US. And I could bore you with a lot of how the world of Olympics works. I'm sure I'm about to do that over the next few minutes. But
No.
And you're right, the league comparison is very accurate. We have 750-ish clubs across the country in fencing, in both Olympic and Paralympic fencing. And we oversee all of those. We run a national event series, 9 national events per year, our largest of which is actually larger by registration number than the Olympic Games is. So my joke is I'm going to actually one of the largest participation events in the world, and then I'm going to a slightly smaller event called the Olympic Games. But
I want to get into a little bit of how you ended up in fencing, but part of your job is awareness and education, I think. And so give us the nickel tour of the 3 types of fencing or what have you.
So fencing is the sport of the sword. So Basically, it's the kid who had a stick in their hand in the backyard, or the kid who watched Star Wars and decided they'd really like to be a Jedi, or a lot of people watch Mask of Zorro, Three Musketeers, Pirates of the Caribbean, and that's often how people get into fencing.
Yeah.
Most of what I've just talked about is saber.
Okay.
So what you see on TV most often is saber. That's the slashing weapon that comes from war. It was the where you slashed your opponent and you would kill the opponent and steal his horse.
Okay.
Uh, yes, exactly. That's my funnest, the funnest way of a sport coming about in the Olympic Games. And that was primarily a men's sport until '04 when women came into the Olympic Games. And it was actually the US who pushed for that. And indeed, we're known for our women's saberists. Then there's foil, which also came from warriors. The idea was you'd pierce the chain link armor on the torso. So the area that you can touch is the torso. Both foil and saber are what's called right-of-way weapons. So if you think about the NFL, where you have possession of the ball, you go one way, and then you go the other when the other person has possession of the ball, that's pretty much how right-of-way works. And then there's épée, which never was a war weapon. It was invented by the French for sport, and that is targeting any area of the body, and there's no right-of-way, so you can hit each other as much as you like.
Okay.
Interestingly, it's a much more defensive weapon as a result. But it's the most popular weapon in the US. When we go into the Paris Olympic Games, you'll be seeing us compete in all three of those. We're best at foil, I'd argue. The world number one defending Olympic champion is Lee Kiefer from Lexington, Kentucky. And then saber, we're going to do very well as well. We anticipate we have the defending reigning world champion Eli Dershowitz, who's from Boston but resides in New York, and the world number one team, so you compete in team and individual, which is, we call them the gentlemen of Harvard because they're all Harvard current alumni or incoming students. They're the world's number one team, most of whom are based out of New York City as well. So that's the three basic forms. Paralympic fencing, which is done in a wheelchair, covers all three. So most, different to able-bodied fencing, most para fencers will actually fence more than one weapon, which is quite a skill.
Wow.
It's stationary.
I see.
But you've still got to lean side to side and get as much athletic advantage as you can.
Okay.
International, it's called wheelchair fencing. We call it para fencing in the US because not everybody is a wheelchair user.
I see. Perfect.
They fence in a wheelchair, but today they may not use a wheelchair. So, but yes, it's a complex world in a way. But to the layman, to the person grabbing a sword for the first time, it's really the sword sport. It's what can I do to be a Captain Jack Sparrow or a Luke Skywalker,
or as we call it, Sparrow.
Or
okay.
Okay. Remember, I'm British. It's the original King's English. As I tell most people, I speak two languages badly, and they're both English. But that's the idea. Is our job is partly to help people find their way to grabbing the sword for the first time.
Perfect.
And that's how the journey to the Olympic Games begins, and a lot to the NCAA as well. Or indeed, our oldest competitive fencer in the US is in their mid-80s. And our youngest is about 6. So we cover all of that. And our job in terms of, to your point, marketing the sport is helping the sport find ways to people's imagination. And that's part of it. It's another part is sending people to the Olympic Games, but we're a business.
Yes,
we need customers,
and
our customers are fencers.
That's exactly. Thank you for teeing me up for that. First of all, fantastic overview. As I said, part of your job is to grow awareness and information, and as we say in podcasting, edutainment. Sounds like a good combination of your role. And I also will get to part of the brand purpose that you so embrace as an NGB, but diversity, equity, and inclusion is certainly there in spades. So we'll talk about that. But you teed me up perfectly to talk about the business. And this is a podcast about media marketing and advertising. And at the risk of putting off marketing specifics for a second, I do want you to go into what led into this particular role, which was weightlifting. And you really had a challenge, Phil, to do a turnaround there. So that will, I think, get us into some of the tactics that you learned and then applied at USA Fencing, both of which are, let's call it kind of niche sports. So discuss.
Yeah, USA Weightlifting had opportunities. When I came over, I didn't specifically desire or necessarily think about working in the sport of weightlifting. It was a small sport at the time. It had about just less than 10,000 participants in the US. It had some history of distrust in its own membership, meaning the frankly the customers.
Mhm.
Uh, so it had some cultural challenges, both in terms of the international world, particularly in doping, which is basically drugged athletes.
Mhm.
It had some perception challenges, particularly around women. It had some challenges, frankly, in the way it was being run. Um, at the same time, there was an emerging brand called CrossFit, which
Sure.
was pulling in the snatch and the clean and jerks, and it was the one which really caught my eye because of that. Because CrossFit was putting a barbell into more people's hands than had ever been put into hands before, and not only that, it was doing it with women, which was huge.
Yes.
So over the course of time, part of it was partnering with CrossFit and Rogue Fitness, which is their number one sponsor and equipment supplier, and indeed became USA Weightlifting's number one supplier. And lots of great things that happened with Rogue, and it was a great story of a business built by really two people, where it's a husband and wife
Mhm.
team. It's an engineer who built a gymnastics ring for his wife who was competing in the CrossFit Games. And his wife became sort of the sales and marketing end of it. I can tell you those two are unbelievably successful in their business.
Ah,
But they are a true partnership, and it's amazing to see how that's grown from a garage to a huge Amazon-sized warehouse. So we did turn around the business. We grew it by 4 times in revenue, 3 times in membership, and that's really how you judge a lot of NGBs, national governing bodies. I apologize.
we get it now.
It's but weightlifting was a turnaround. We did a lot to grow the sport, particularly amongst women. A lot with not a lot of money either.
Uh-huh.
We did build a sponsorship portfolio there. There's a big market for strength sport because strength sport as an overarching business includes powerlifting, CrossFit, strongman, bodybuilding to a
Mhm.
degree. Certainly Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, being the most famous. So there was a lot we did over the years. A lot of them were small, or what I might call grassroots, down and dirty tactics to grow weightlifting in the US. But we were really, I will be honest, we wouldn't have been able to have those opportunities a lot of time without CrossFit. Building that business around CrossFit almost
Yes.
was a big reason for that success.
Okay. And so is there anything comparable in the world of fencing where there was niche focused? I mean, aside from the love of Star Wars or, Zorro or Captain Jack Sparrow. Um, is,
There's definitely a number of things I brought over, but I'll take a step back a second. National governing bodies of sport get some limited funding, usually under 10%, from the Olympic and Paralympic Committee. They get zero government funding. So we're a business. We have to generate money, which means we have to create products which people want to buy, same as
ah,
any other business. And then we have to go and market those products. So we have a huge incentive to grow our sports. And I think the commonality you'll hear from what I talked about with CrossFit is harnessing those opportunities. What is the big thing for us? In fencing, the largest attraction is the NCAA. People want that scholarship, very similar to gymnastics. People want entry into those high end schools. People want to get the scholarships where they can. And there is, of course, people who are attracted by, I just love this, and I love the quirkiness of it. I love the physical chess aspect of it. And so when we're thinking about how we build that business, it comes down to, all right, where are we strong? Where can we efficiently use marketing dollars to attract new fencers? And similarly, where can we find those dollars to spend? So we've built a big sports marketing sponsorship business in a way probably no one ever has
Mm.
in certainly in Olympic and Paralympic sport world. They may have done a little bit of that in the NBA, NFL, East Coast League, certainly American Hockey League, and so forth. So we've really gone out there with fencing and built that around the NCAA opportunities, around the major hub cities where we know fencing can thrive, like New York City,
Yes.
like Boston, like Los Angeles, like Denver, where we know we can get home runs. Whereas weightlifting was much more Texas, Florida, Atlanta, stroke Savannah in Georgia.
Interesting.
There was much more southern and to a degree Midwestern. Yes, California was big. Yes, Texas was big. But you have two choices when you're using marketing dollars. Do you focus on those places where you feel like you've got the deepest sea to fish?
Hmm.
I'd argue you do. We marketeers look at things through a lens of who is my customer? And one of the things we've really done in fencing, actually we could have done a better job in weightlifting, is really learning that. Right down to what do they read? I know how many people in my membership, because I have such good data, have speak Korean as a second language, not as a primary language, as a second language. So it's doing that level of research allows you to be more efficient with who you go and try and interest in the sport of fencing.
Oh, I love how you explained all of that. I mean, the business application, the marketing application, the geo targeting all makes so much sense. And the proof is in the pudding because I read you have a blog, which is one of your corporate communication tools that you're using. And I'm going to read this now. Um, there's a record number of members, 40,000 plus, which is the most in USA fencing history, thanks to everyone who keeps pushing to spread the word of the sport. So, hats off to you, Phil. What are some of the other tactics beyond the 5 minutes with Phil, your blog, that you're using in the beauty of marketing to get the word out?
Yeah, so 5 Minutes with Phil speaks to our existing members. So it's internal. Membership organizations are a little unique in that way, and sports organizations are too. So the pro sport equivalent is speaking to your season ticket
Mhm.
holders. That's me talking to our most ardent people who are going to be out there and be our foot soldiers on the ground. They're the people who are going to do the equivalent of bringing somebody to a game.
Uh-huh.
That's what we want them to do, bring another fencer down. One of our cornerstone programs this Olympic and Paralympic Games is Fence Across America. It's never been attempted by a national governing body before, and I think it's interesting. So, a traditional way of thinking is everything's in Paris or everything's in Tokyo or London. London is of course, undisputedly
Mm.
the best Olympic Games, or and so forth. We've turned that on its head and said, let's bring a taste of the Olympic Games home. And to your point, EB, you said that this is a niche sport, and you're right, it is. This isn't baseball or
Gymnastics.
even lacrosse. The gymnastics, where you're
Yeah.
going to see a lot of it on television,
Hmm.
and B, you have a lot of opportunities to try it. So we're in 10 cities across America. We are bringing home the ability to try fencing and, as we call it, grab a sword. And the idea is you can watch Lee Kiefer or Eli Dershowitz or Elizabeth Tartakovsky win gold, hopefully, in the morning on your television screen. And then as you go about your day, during the time that fencing is going on, you can go to any of these sites across the United States, three of which are in the New York City metro, and actually physically try the sport. Well, then, if you think about that from a marketing funnel perspective, then marketeers will understand, okay, that sounds great. What happens next? Well, now you're going there, you're giving us your information because you need a trial membership because I need to insure you, which means I can give you information from the next few weeks on fencing.
Oh,
So the whole process begins with you've gone there, you've grabbed a sword in New York City, you're probably fencing Olympian,
yes.
which is really fun. And then, of course, the media as well. The earned media side of that's huge.
Yes.
On one day alone, we have 7 different NBC stations and 2 ABC stations across America doing their morning shows from those events. To buy that advertising, you'd never be able to do that in a $16 million business like USA Fencing. So it's a really fun activity, and I can't tell you it's been successful yet. We think it is going to be
It
successful, but it's the
launches
first time.
this month, right? While you're in Paris, this will be
Yeah,
taking place across the
yeah,
country.
that's right.
Okay.
So I'll have my team back here in the US. I physically will be in Paris, but my colleagues back here in the US will be managing the sites across the US. And of course, domestic communications,
Sure.
domestic marketing. We have influencer programs, so we're going to have some nice, interesting surprise appearances from different athletes outside of fencing who have followings outside of fencing. We've got a lot of employers across New York City, including some of the major banks, are inviting all of their employees to come down and try it out. Same here in Denver, where I live.
Uh-huh.
Same in Los Angeles. We may have some people who may or may not have wielded a sword in a film or two, may or may not be appearing at one or two of them.
Oh,
It's going to be fun. We're still working on that as we speak, and we're not going to turn down any opportunities. But
that's cool.
look, again, it comes down to maximizing, right? So you see, and part of the reason we're even doing this podcast right now is because sports like fencing, weightlifting, even gymnastics, but certainly judo, taekwondo, climbing, come to the mind only during the Olympic Games. And so we're building on those opportunities to really grab and harness that. And that doesn't mean we don't do that throughout the rest of the time. To your point, we've just crested a record number of memberships this season, which is remarkable coming out of COVID-19,
Yeah.
where most participation sports, which is really what we are major business concerns events around the country. That's where we make most of our money.
Mm-hmm.
And to really crest out of that, going out and above the membership number,
Okay.
especially with a business that looks at the NCAA and where we're expanding in the NCAA, is quite remarkable, if I do say so myself.
And you should.
So it's no, thank you. So yeah, Fence Across America is a cornerstone, certainly, of what we're doing right now. But there's day to day roles in spreading fencing. But it comes down to exactly what I just talked about. It's having people try the sport, physically
Mm-hmm.
getting them off of the couch and with a weapon in their hand is really important to spreading that sport. And it's the same tactics really for weightlifting, the same tactics for cycling. But the important thing is figuring out who is my audience and why do they do this?
True, but
And
Phil,
you have,
it's a little harder to throw somebody down on a mat in trying weightlifting than to learn en garde, right?
it is, we're lucky. You can really do fencing pretty quickly in under 20 minutes. I'm not suggesting you're ready for the Olympic Games in 20 minutes, but you can certainly try it, advance, retreat, parry,
Yeah.
riposte. You can do that
Okay.
in under 20 minutes with a good, solid person who knows what they're doing teaching you.
Got it. So, again, you've mentioned a few classic elements there, and then you teed us up to talk about revenue. So, I will have my epee ready in Grand Central or in my backyard, Central Park. And I know you have other locations coming last week of July, and I'll add a link to the show notes for Fence Across America. But as you also said, part of your money makers are events around the country that also builds awareness and interest, helps qualifiers for NCAA scholarships. But now, Phil, you have also got some exciting sponsors that are on board now. I recently read that you've signed Hilton, for example. I think you have Avis. You mentioned that bank employees will participate. Talk to me about the opportunities that you offer a sponsor. Where's the alignment? What's the WIFM, the what's in it for me as a sponsor?
That's my favorite radio station, by the way.
WIFM.
Exactly. Um, so this is where data comes in huge for us, and fencing is interesting because there are people with a sports marketing budget, and a lot of those people will do that via a particular set of sports. So there will be people who have a golf budget, who have a tennis budget, who have a football budget, who have a soccer, real football budget. And so I have to say that I'm British, right? But very few people have a fencing budget. So we've had to turn that on its head, and we've done rather well for a national governing body world.
Mhm.
So, idea of scale, 40,000 is top third of national governing bodies.
Wow.
There's about 56 of us. That puts us pretty cleanly into the top 10, and we're actually higher via revenue. So part of that is because we have some of the world's largest participation events are actually USA Fencings, and including our national championships, which has over 13,000 registrations each July 4th time. And then we have another set of regional events, which also can be very large, and then local events all around the country, all of which come under USA Fencing, using that league analogy. But also with membership organizations, you know a lot about people. So what we did is we looked at who has our similar demographics, which marketeers are likely to be targeting us. And we started with, okay, what's our membership look like in terms of geography, in terms of locations, in terms of their ethnicity, their affluence. And we came up with some good comparators, some of which we actually have done joint agreements with their national governing body of sport too, namely sailing. And so we looked at sailing, rowing, tennis, golf, and looked at some business opportunities there. We also looked at who is the people who are looking at those brands and who do we have in our membership. So a few things we did that was really interesting was, one, we tie a lot of our partnerships to data. So we de-risk them for the incoming brand because we have to be candid, fight dirty a little bit. We don't have the brand of a New York Yankees or even a USA Gymnastics where you're buying brand and eyeballs.
Sure.
We have data, we have people, and we have a direct road to them. So take our first non-endemic sponsor, that was Naked Wines. We figured out we had very similar demographics. And sure enough, we have been able to track the data on wine sold, average sale per customer, average number of cases bought, and number of cases total throughout the year. And sure enough, we've beaten out every other partnership they have.
Fascinating.
And it's great. And that's what we've built on with a lot of those non-endemic sponsors. And by that, I mean people from outside of the sport.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is finding that person who's going to open the door and then finding the reason. And that sounds so simple, but it's not. It's finding that real nugget of information. You talk about Avis. It makes a lot of sense when you're renting as many cars as our people are around the country. But also, they're not just renting cars for fencing events. Many people are executives who travel. They have to go and rent a car for work when they're flying into Des Moines, Iowa to get to their manufacturing facility in Fairfield, Iowa. Then they need a car. So again, we're able to track that, and we know that real return on investment, which is why we've been able to attract some brands which ordinarily that wouldn't happen. And so getting to those connections, I created a CEO advisory council. I stole this from McLaren F1. And basically that council advises me on a number of business issues. I will not claim to be the smartest man in the room at any one time. But one of the things that they do is utilize their networks to help with business questions. And that's both in terms of, sponsorship and advertising revenue, but also other areas. One of them helped us create a collective purchasing facility for our clubs, which again, going back to the league analogy, comes under what most leagues would call club and team business services. So what do we buy? Well, guess what? A lot of physical gym locations require cleaning materials. So let's go and negotiate a really great deal on cleaning materials. That sounds crazy. And I will say one of my favorite sponsorships is not our biggest. It hasn't quite been announced yet, but I think by the time this podcast airs, it might have been.
All right.
Which is the official fence or fencers.
It makes so much sense. Wow.
I kind of love it. So
good fencing makes good neighbors.
Yes, precisely.
That'll be $10.
Right. You won't believe how many times that as USA Fencing we get phone calls or emails saying, "Hello, can you quote me for my fence around my yard?" And you wouldn't believe how many times that fencing companies get calls saying, "Hello, I'd like to
Love
enroll
it.
my kid for a lesson."
Yeah.
It's absolutely hilarious. I do have an ambition to find an official foil of foilists too. So if you're a marketeer for Reynolds Wrap and you happen to be listening, reach out.
Okay. It's funny because Moss Appeal, my company, also produces the podcast for Angie, formerly known as Angie's
Oh,
List.
really?
Yes. And so I think that maybe there's some synergy between fence installers. Can you sign my kid up for lessons? Let me just refer you to how to install a fence on Angie.com. There's something there, Phil.
Seriously, there's been that. We've literally referred people out to local fencing companies, particularly in our headquarters location of Colorado Springs. But it's unbelievable because they see USA Fence and they go, "Oh, well, that sounds like they must be really good at what they do. I'm pretty sure they can put up a white picket fence, no problem at all."
Love it.
So it's maybe that's a new business idea or a new revenue opportunity that we
Yeah.
should look at, or putting fences in different places.
Uh, so let's talk about how your marketing 101, which is perfect. How does that differ from what you're either allowed to do or how you approach marketing with Olympics and Paralympics? For example, I was watching the gymnastics trials on TV and I saw an ad for Toyota, which I guess is an Olympics official sponsor. And they represented a lot of different sports that will be in Paris. And there was a small snippet of fencing. Did you get involved in that? Did you have to bless that? Or did they just get carte blanche because they are an Olympic sponsor? How does that
So
work?
So there's quite a lot of rules. So the most important rule around this is called Rule 40, which basically determines the protection of the Olympic marks in the Olympic Games. And there's ways that marketeers look at this. So what you're referring to is something called top sponsors, TOP. And those sponsors are the blue chip, for want of better terminology, worldwide sponsors of the Olympic Games. And then Toyota is actually ending after Paris, but is currently the official automotive manufacturer of the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games. There's some chance, from what I understand, they might stay involved in the Paralympic Games, and they've actually been really amazing supporters, particularly at the Paralympics.
Nice.
And indeed, they actually funded a USA fencing Paralympic camp. Very seldom does that money make its way through to the national federation, national governing body
I
level.
see.
So those sponsors are people like Deloitte, and you likely would have seen Lee Kiefer because she's a Team Deloitte person in that advert. So the way that works is they will look at across sports across the world and select ambassadors, and they'll pay those athletes to be part of their advertising. So in fencing, Daryl Homer is Team Toyota. Lee Kiefer is probably our most sponsored athlete in that realm. And I believe when you're watching the trials, you would have seen her in Deloitte's advertising for sure. Ralph Lauren has her in their advertising, as they do Daryl Homer as well. Not every Olympian will feature, though. So there's sort of three tiers of how this works, or four. There's the IOC side, which is what we've really just talked about. There is National Olympic Committee sponsors, which sponsor the Team USA. That's a little complicated right now because there's Los Angeles involved. So we're
Coming up,
hosting the games
right?
in 28.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Team USA is sort of combined with LA 28 right now, which is why you have Delta as the official airline of Team USA. And then you'll have personal sponsors of athletes, and you'll have national governing body sponsors. So we're, fingers crossed, touching wood, about to close an agreement with an airline. I can tell you now it's not Delta, because we will go almost opposition to the official airline of the worldwide or national sponsors, because in a way they feel like they're already sponsoring Team USA, which is through the Olympic side.
Yeah.
For us, they're not. They're not sponsoring USA Fencing. Similarly, you might find an endorsement from, let's say, United or a American versus a Delta of a fencer or of a weightlifter. or what have you. And this happens every country in the world. It's quite a complex space overall, Olympic and Paralympic marketing. And the Paralympic Games will have additional sponsors that the Olympic Games does not, primarily coming out of the British market. And the Paralympics will allow on-field of play advertising. The Olympics does not. So there's a lot of complex activity going on, but the biggest thing is infringement on the 5 rings and the Paralympic age toes.
Okay.
That's what's really protected through Rule 40. So you'll see some advertisers. My favorite was, I think it was Allstate Insurance in the last games. They had a lot of non-branded sport going on in their advertising during the games, some of which was on NBC, which carries the Olympics.
Yes.
And one of those was weightlifting. And I designed personally the national event setup for weightlifting, and it was a replica of it. And the person they had was almost assuredly a image of an athlete named Harrison Morris, which was amazing to see. And they had him sort of turn into this track athlete. So it was whoever put that together had done a lot of research, but you never saw the Olympic rings, you never saw the USA weightlifting, USA track and field logo, or you saw the sports. Whereas you were talking about the Toyota advert, I know the one you're talking about. It's got David Leety, who's a New Zealand weightlifter.
Yes.
And there's he has kids around him, and they're doing the haka.
Yep.
But they can use the rings and they can use the agitos
because they're a
but
top
let's say
sponsor.
Correct. They paid for that right.
Okay.
So and you'll have local sponsors. For example, LVMH is a very, very large sponsor of Paris 24, as is EDF Energy.
Makes sense.
A number of other brands will be local sponsors, and you're seeing that happen with the LA Olympics with Cisco, with Delta, Lilly, who you would have seen through the gymnastics airing. Yep. Xfinity is another one, which is a domestic large sponsor of the Olympic Games. So that's the complexity is, from my perspective, I'm going after sponsors for USA Fencing. But I'm also going to work with our athlete agents to maximize their revenue. So to maximize a Lee Kiefer, a Nick Itkin, a Miles Chamley-Watson's revenue. Because that's interesting for them, because they have a short athletic career to make money. But it's also interesting for me at my level of sport, because to your point, you saw Lee Kiefer fence in a Deloitte advert. That's fencing getting more advertising indirectly.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Now, 2 more topics. One is brand purpose and one is you personally. And let's see if the rings overlap a little bit, like a Venn diagram. You know, I ask everybody about brand purpose, and you and USA Fencing are really steeped in it. Your NGB recently won honors for its DEI efforts. I'd love for you to tell me about that. And then I want to know how you personally support causes as well.
So yeah, you're right. There's a little bit of crossover. One of the reasons perhaps I'm in USA Fencing is because there's a good deal of alignment with my own personal values, with values that the organization wanted. We won the DIB award. So what you're talking about is the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee has an award. They look for the best diversity and inclusion program to spread sport in the country. I was a runner-up twice with weightlifting, and then we won it with USA Fencing with a program named Fencing the Gap. Fencing is usually a pretty affluent sport. A poor perception of fencing is that we're a very private school, white, upper class sport. And it's ironic because we're actually the most diverse sport in the NCAA. We are above, by a very slim margin, women's basketball in our university. And one of the things that we did with Fencing the Gap is to address the financial ability to fence. And we have some great programs that are designed to widen participation, particularly in New York. Peace, run by Olympian Nzinga Prescott in Brooklyn. The Peter Westbrook Foundation, which has never failed to send an Olympian to the Olympic Games. And Nelia in Atlanta, 3 very good examples of great, well-funded, participation-based programs that do not require a financial commitment at all. We've tried to expand on that work through Fencing the Gap and basically using our one area of revenue we didn't talk about, our foundation and donors to come in and
Yes.
help fencing to be able to be affordable, quite frankly. And that there's a lot of travel. We talked about our partnerships with Hilton and with Avis. That's partly because of the amount of travel involved. We talked about our events. Those all link together here, but they all cost. If you're going to go to an event and you live in New York and you go to an event in, pick your city, Denver, Colorado, you're spending $500 on a flight. You're spending another $500, $600 on
Yeah.
accommodation. You've got food. You've got your registration money that comes in. You're probably out $2,000 by the end of that.
Mm.
You start doing that 4 or 5 times a year, and now you start competing in Europe as a cadet, which is under 17. It ramps up quickly. So the idea of Fencing the Gap is very simple. It's grant funding that we can put towards fencers who otherwise can't afford to play the sport. And we've done a lot in DIB, the Empower Project around expanding women. Back in weightlifting, one of my proudest achievements was we made it a women's majority sport. And there was a lot of tactics that went into that. And my belief is that you can weave DIB into almost any area. A little thing. Here's my favorite little thing that everyone goes, even in fencing or weightlifting. We list women first every time. When we name a team, traditionally you list men first, women second. We always list women 1st.
Mhm.
And it's a very small psychological difference that no one ever notices. But when they look at it, they go, oh my God, that's smart. Because the
Yep.
first person you're talking about is a female. The first coach you're talking about is a woman. And there's a lot of ways that we intertwine these things. Fencing the Gap was specifically about maximizing our impact from a financial perspective. But things like the Empower Project are about maximizing our volume of women. What's in it for me as a business? More diverse communities means more customers.
Right.
And more women coaches means more people that you might be comfortable with, which means more customers.
And certainly the halo effect. And, we all know this statistic of customers who support brands that support good causes. And Phil, I also want to applaud you because I know that not only do you and your wife, who I happen to know, support things like you're both big snowboarders and you support boarding for breast cancer, but you have also supported USA weightlifting and USA fencing. So, to pull the curtain back on why I mention your wife, a little full disclosure. And I love this. I love this small world. So, for those of you who stuck through his brilliance, now you get a little personal insight. Phil, I met you 1 year ago at a family dinner and discovered two long lost cousins I didn't know I had, two sisters. You were there because you're married to one of them. And then
That's right.
I went to Podcast Movement in Denver, I think it was. And I got to see you again just a few months later. And so, from this very thin blood connection, I created a new friendship with you and your wife. And now I just met your baby girl. So, congratulations.
Congratulations.
But lest anybody think that any nepotism was involved, I also want to thank you so much because when you were named a 40 under 40 of sports CEOs, they asked favorite podcasts and you mentioned insider interviews. I had no idea you had done that or were going to do that. I was so touched. And I thought you just did it because we're sort of unblood cousins, but you said you really liked the show. So
Yeah, I don't really get a chance to listen to many podcasts. I wish I had the time to, but I don't. But I actually listened to your one. And, I will be honest, I started listening to it after I met you and then realized, well,
that's brand marketing
yeah,
on my part.
exactly. Well, why not? And it's actually become a staple for me
Aw.
because there's a lot of relevance for what we do in the insider interviews that you've done. That's why I was asked that question by my friend and colleague Rachel Axon at the Sports Business Journal when she was doing the 40 under 40 article. And it was the first one that came to mind, legitimately.
Oh,
And yes, and don't get me wrong, there's some episodes where I go, oh, my word, that was really great. And others where I go, okay, that was fun to listen to, but I didn't,
Yeah.
get too much out of
Right.
that from my own world. But a lot of what I've done over my career is taking other people's ideas and applying them into Olympic and Paralympic sport. That's how we've done
Mm.
things differently. And so I find it a great way to, listen to, as the title suggests, as an insider, and apply that to what we do. And yes, as you said, we happen to be related by marriage. And my wonderful and amazing wife, Jessica, is the better Andrews of the two, that's for sure. I'm sure Renesmee will grow up to be better than the two of us. So
Aw.
it's
So yes,
been a wonderful journey.
thank you so much for that, and happy to have you in my extended family. But also, you mentioned your daughter. As a last question, I know that you started out marketing at like the ripe old age of 14. When she gets to high school or college in another 15 to 20 years, what kind of advice would you give her if she wanted to get into marketing?
That's a really interesting question. One I haven't thought about too much.
Stay away.
Um, partly, but it's I think life is about learning from people. And maybe some people won't like this answer. When I look for people I employ, I look for who they learn from, who their mentors are. I look for their knowledge, their personality, their work style.
Mm,
I don't look at where they went to college. Unless it's look, I will say I employ a doctor who's my sports medicine director. I kind of like that they're a doctor. Other than that, I care about who you are, and I care about what you've done to go out there and learn.
mm,
And by that I mean, yeah, listening to podcasts like Insider Interviews. I mean that legitimately, but also going for coffee with those people. I've learned so much from people,
yeah.
um, and from their stories and when we were turning around weightlifting, when I saw British cycling, because on the performance side, meaning the field of play, they turned it around in such a short time, and there's lots of books on it. I wanted to hear from the people who did it,
Mm,
and I've learned more in my life from just going to people and saying, "Talk to me about this."
yeah.
And so what I'd love to see Renesmee do is whatever her chosen profession is, whether it's marketing or something else, is go and learn from the people who are doing it really well. Go and learn from the people that you admire.
Mm.
Because in my experience, most people don't turn down someone who says, "Hello, I'd like a coffee and I'd like to learn from you." And if they do turn that down, they might not be the person you want to go to anyway.
Oh my gosh. Phil Andrews, you are my Ted Lasso, both in marketing and now in life philosophy. Just beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me on, EP. It really does mean a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah. And I I don't know if it's appropriate to say break a leg at the Olympics, but we'll be cheering
We
for
hope
you.
not to, although this is the one sport where you can say, go stab somebody.
All right, parry on, my friend. So, to wrap it up, just a little reminder that a good podcast doesn't have to be hard, but it ain't easy. I can help you launch yours, market yours, or host yours. And if you want to support this fabulous free content, you can find me at buymeacoffee.com/mossappeal, truefans.fm, Moss Appeal, anywhere on social media, and a big shout out to John Clayton for the theme music. But truly, thank you for listening, learning, and sharing Insider Interviews with me, E.B. Moss.